Welcome to your Read Aloud for Thursday, April the 1st. Today we are reading November Part 3. So you've got 6 questions. Where is Mrs. Baker going? How long does Holling have? What is Ariel? What was on the shelf? What sounds came out? Why is Shakespeare wrong? When Monday came and I walked into the classroom carrying a long box of cream puffs, it was pretty clear that Danny Hupfer and Merrill Lee and Doug Switek and Mai Thee would have been at me with daggers looking for a pound of flesh if I had failed them. I set the box on the shelf by the window and popped it open. 24 cream puffs, brown, light, perfect cream puffs, waiting to be eaten after lunch. Mrs. Baker didn't say anything, but all through English for You and Me, the buttery vanilla smell of the cream puffs wafted around the room with the circulating air, and even Mrs. Baker couldn't help but look at them. I saw her nostrils grow wide. Danny Hupfer kept turning around at me and grinning, and Merrilee pretended like she didn't care much, but she's a terrible liar. If lunchtime hadn't come when it did, we might have all gone wild, even Mrs. Baker. But finally, the clock clicked to noon, and we crammed our sandwiches down our throats, and then Danny Hupfer stood up and approached the brown, light, perfect cream puffs, sort of reverently. "Not just yet, Mr. Hupfer," said Mrs. Baker. Danny Hupfer looked at her like he'd just missed an easy goal. Merrilee looked at me like it was my fault. "If you're going to eat the cream puffs," said Mrs. Baker, "you're going to have to do it on your own time. Go out for lunch recess, come back a few minutes early, then you may gorge yourselves as you please." "I bet she's going to take 3 for herself," whispered Doug Switek. "No, Mr. Switek, she is not going to take 3 for herself," said Mrs. Baker. "I'm going to St. Adalbert's to quickly light a candle." So that's number 1. "I will be back in time for your gorging. Now, out, all of you." So we went out. It was, of course, a cold November day on Long Island, and everything was, of course, gray. The sky, the air, the grass, the drizzle misting down, gray everywhere. We stood around in a huddled group, a little bit damp and still hungry because we'd eaten so fast, and there were 24 cream puffs waiting for everyone back in the classroom. 24 brown, light, perfect cream puffs. "They better be good," said Merrilee. "They'll be good," I said. "They better be really good," said Danny Hupfer. "They'll be really good," I said. When there were only 7 minutes left in recess, Danny Hupfer declared that we had served our time, and if Mrs. Baker hadn't come back yet, we still deserved our cream puffs. So like an unstoppable mob, like a tidal wave, like an avalanche, we rushed into Camillo Junior High, up 2 flights of stairs and to the doorway of our classroom. And then we stopped. On the shelf, the long box of cream puffs lay ripped apart, and in the middle of the buttery brown light perfect cream puffs stood Sycorax and Caliban, up on their hind legs, their paws holding shreds of crust to their mouths. Their faces were covered with yellow vanilla filling and powdered sugar. Their naked tails were thick with it. Their scabby skin was slathered with it. Then Mrs. Baker came behind us and peered in. The rats opened their snouts and clacked their yellow teeth at her. And Mrs. Baker screamed, "Strange stuff, the dropsy drown you, a red plague rid you, thrice double ass." That last one I knew about, but I wasn't going to tell you that I knew it because of what you'd think of me. Sycorax and Caliban understood the meaning of all those, I guess. They scurried out of the box, skidding in the vanilla cream, and leaped back into the radiators. We heard them climb up inside the walls and then scamper across the asbestos tiles in the ceiling. There was a long and absolute silence. Then Merrilee turned to me. "You still owe us cream puffs," she said. 10 days, said Mai Thee. 10 days? "We gave you 3 weeks already," said Danny Hupfer. "Now you have 10 days only." And that is number 2. 10 days, I said. This is another situation where repetition is not a rhetorical virtue, said Mrs. Baker. Clean up the mess, Mr. Hood. And I did, but I wasn't happy. Usually the last week before Thanksgiving was pretty easy. Everyone is thinking about 2 days off from school, grandparents coming for dinner, the Syosset-Farmingdale football rivalry, and all that. It wasn't an easy week this year, not for me. It was a long week. First, somehow it became my fault that Sycorax and Caliban ate the cream puffs. I think this was because of Marilee. For 3 days, things were whispered about me that I hope I never have to hear. Then, second, on Wednesday afternoon, when I went to get the script for the Long Island Shakespeare Company's holiday extravaganza from Mr. Goldman, I found out I was going to play Ariel from The Tempest. You know who Ariel is? Ariel is a fairy. So that's number 3. A fairy. Let me tell you, it is not a good thing for a boy from Camillo Junior High to play a fairy, especially a boy who has already been singing soprano for Miss Violet of the Very Spiky Heels. I don't think I could play Ariel, I told Mr. Goldman. Here's your costume, he said, and he handed me a bright pair of yellow tights with white feathers on the... Well, I'll let you guess where the white feathers were. Third, now that I needed another set of cream puffs, I asked my father if he might ever imagine a 3-week advance on my allowance. Since he had just clinched the deal with the Baker Sporting Emporium store, and he just laughed out loud. You have to be a comedian, he said. You and Bob Hope, you could travel to Saigon together and do troupe shows. Well, I wasn't trying to be funny, I said. Well, you must have been trying to be funny, since no kid of mine in his right mind would ever ask for a 3-week advance on his allowance. Yeah, I was trying to be funny, I said. That's what I thought, he said. Then fourth, when I told Marilee I might not be able to get the cream puffs by next Wednesday, I wouldn't spread that around if I were you, and that my father was a big cheapskate since he'd just landed this big deal with the Baker Sporting Emporium store, and he wouldn't give me a dime, she started to cry. Really? Marilee, I said, it's not all that bad. I'll find a way to get the cream puffs. I mean... You jerk, said Marilee. You don't understand anything. And she wouldn't speak to me or anyone else for the rest of the day. Fifth, on the Tuesday before the Wednesday of the cream puff deadline, Mr. Guareschi came in and asked Mrs. Baker if she knew what pied ninny meant. She asked him why he needed to know, and he told her that Doug Switek's brother was in the office at that very moment for having called Mr. Ludema a pied ninny. Mrs. Baker stared straight at me. And sixth, when Wednesday morning came around and I walked into class with a bag of 5 cream puffs, 5 cream puffs only, which was as far as my 1-week allowance would stretch, it was pretty clear that I was doomed. With 5 cream puffs, almost everyone could have 1/4 of a cream puff, I pointed out. It was better than nothing. Marilee shook her head. You're dead, said Danny Hupfer. And I suppose I was. At least I wouldn't have to wear the yellow tights with the white feathers attached you-know-where. But you know that stuff about the darkest nights turning into the brightest dawns? That can sometimes be true, even when you least expect it. Because when we came back in from recess, on the shelf was a long box from Goldman's Best Bakery. And that is number 4. And that box was filled with 24 cream puffs, 24 brown, light, perfect cream puffs, 24 buttery vanilla cream puffs. Mr. Hood was simply playing a joke on all of you, said Mrs. Baker. Now enjoy. And we did. This will continue in the second video.